What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel today. I am, however, pleased once again to be joined by another Adam, who I am very good friends with. Adam Spinella. He is an assistant coach for the Dickinson College men's basketball team, a writer for the Celtics blog, and just an overall basketball, draft, NBA, all of it expert. If you're not following him on Twitter, remedy that immediately. He can be found at Spinella14, spelled exactly as it sounds. You should also be following him on YouTube. He's done a bunch of fantastic draft breakdowns there. Just go to YouTube, search Adam Spinella like I did, and he will most certainly come up. So subscribe to him there. And we are, if you didn't know, going to talk about the draft lottery results, which just came out minutes ago before we recorded this. However, before we start, just a quick shout out to our sponsors as per usual, betonline.ag, Sunday Ticket, and our new sponsor, Theragun. Without any of them, this podcast would not be possible, so look to hear from them shortly. Spins, how are you doing?
Dan, I'm doing fantastic. It's always an energizing evening once you see the results of the ping pong balls and those team logos being drawn from the envelope. So finally, draft season is in full swing. The order is locked in, and now it's just time to figure out who the hell goes where.
Right. And look, it's not draft season until the Knicks officially get fucked over in the lottery, which happened. They have the 8th pick, and I'll run this down just really quickly, the lottery results. 14 is Memphis, but it goes to Boston. 13 is the Pelicans. 12 is the Kings. 11 is the Spurs. 10 is the Suns. 9 is the Wizards. 8 is the Knicks. 7 is the Pistons. 6 is the Hawks. 5th is the Cavaliers. 4th is the Bulls. 3rd is the Hornets. 2nd is the Warriors. And 1st, overall, the Minnesota Timberwolves. An interesting order, just because the top two teams just had this big trade with one another, where Golden State owns Minnesota's pick, top 3 protected next year, I think. So that was an interesting finish. Did you have any just impressions or initial thoughts once you saw that final order come out on Thursday night?
Well, once we got into the top 4 there, 2 Eastern Conference and 2 Western Conference teams. And for many years, I've been thinking about how, for some reason, the Western Conference seems to get pretty lucky with snagging away some of the top talent in different drafts at a time when, it might be beneficial to get a few more stars in the Eastern Conference. And once again here, Minnesota, Golden State going 1-2, Charlotte and Chicago locked into that 3-4 spot. So kind of the rich get richer in the Western Conference. No matter who Minnesota and Golden State kind of take from this, is going to become even more of a bloodbath than it's already been.
So let's start at the top here. You have a big board. I'm looking at it. You were kind enough to give it to me with all the links to your breakdowns, which I also super appreciated, by the way. I know a lot of people have said that there's not a consensus number 1 pick, but it does feel like that we're sort of reaching that. And I believe that you're kind of there as well. So who is just your number 1 guy? And just so the listeners know, I'm a draft blank slate, even more so than usual this time of year. You'd think with the layoff, I'd have had more time to look at film, and I probably did, but chose not to, so I guess shame on me. But that's why Spins is here. So I'm a blank slate. I'm going into this mostly with minimal research, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and we're all just going to take your word as gospel.
Well, I don't know if that's a smart thing to do.
Nope, too late. Listener signed a contract too, so you're off and running.
Well, if we're talking about top overall pick, for me, it is going to come down to Anthony Edwards, guy from Georgia who just physical profile is pretty obscene. 6'5", 6'9" wingspan, really fills it up as a scorer and has a ton of defensive potential. He went through a phase in November in a game against Michigan State in the second half of the Maui Invitational where he absolutely took over and brought Georgia back from about 20 down to knocking on the door of winning that game. Now, they ended up losing, and Georgia didn't have a very successful year. So the knocks on Edwards have really centered around his ability to lead an offense and make smart decisions on a winning team, as well as hone in on his defensive consistency. And he's shown a ton of flashes on both ends of the court, but the overall numbers don't jump out at you and scream efficiency, as well as that kind of lack of winning pedigree that he had at Georgia. But if you take a look just at the skill set that he has, the tools, the physical nature of his play, it's really hard to look at any of the other guys in this draft, in my opinion, and say that they're going to have a higher upside or more kind of likeliness of reaching that upside.
And based on everything I've read, on him, I would tend to agree. The fact that he shot under 30% on high 3-point volume in college kind of does rub me the wrong way. I know he shot over 77% at the foul line, which tends to be a good harbinger. But I think I've read a lot of criticism about his shot selection. And for Minnesota specifically, I actually like the fit with Culver is weird. And now you're getting another offense first guy to go with Towns and D'Angelo Russell. And so I'm wondering if like he ends up being the best fit. I think I'm I'm obsessed with like kind of the wing guard type players, which he falls into. So I would default to him at number one anyway, and you go with who you think is the best player available, I believe, particularly in draft. But I'm just wondering if he ends up being like a good fit for Minnesota, and maybe, they traded their pick last year. Do we see some, and I'll ask you about this throughout for teams that maybe might consider trading their picks, like do we see any discussions on this actual top selection where maybe they're trying to, I don't know who they swing for the fences for, but they have this year's pick that they'll have to move after the draft, of course, since they traded away next year's pick as well. But they have Jared Culver. They have that James Johnson contract as a good salary matcher, assuming he picks up his player option, which he will. And so I'm wondering if they kind of look to just do something there because they feel like they're on this more immediate timeline than Anthony Edwards could provide. And just what I know about him, what you even described about him, I'd just be curious to see how he fits next to Russell and Towns. And of course, Cat being a wing in a 7-footer's body probably absolutely helps all of this.
The Timberwolves, if they're to take Edwards, which I absolutely think they should, and two things stand out to me about that. One, whenever you get the first overall pick, you're going to cater around him a little bit. So I don't think Jarrett Culver factors into whether they should or should not pick Edwards or somebody else. I know LaMelo Ball is going to be a name we hear about a ton in this, but regardless of that, both Russell and Towns at the bookends at playing at the 1 and the 5, great shooters, great guys that provide spacing. I think that's prime for somebody who's going to be more of a mismatch option at the 2. And that's something that Edwards really thrives on. He's physical, he's strong, he can work out of the pinch post and in those areas where we've seen some of the best wing scorers really thrive. A huge knock on Edwards, as you mentioned a little bit, the shooting efficiency. He was under 30% from 3 this year, as was LaMelo Ball. And
I'm sorry. I know it's coming, so I'm giggling a little bit. Please carry on.
For me, Edwards, he didn't shoot the ball great this year, but you look at his AAU stats from before he got there, he was, I think, 45% from 3. Whereas you take a look at LaMelo's combined statistics over the last 3 years of his play, and he's still far below 30%. He's about 26, 27% from 3. So when we're talking about the sustainability and the longevity of the 3-point shot, which at the guard spot is now the most important thing in the game. I mean, we're watching these bubble games. We're seeing what Damian Lillard is doing. I don't know many championship caliber teams over the last decade who have made it all the way to the promised land while having their lead guard not be able to shoot the 3 ball, especially off the bounce. It's huge and it's crucial. And I think if the Wolves get D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards, 2 guys who can do this, along with the floor spacing provided by Cat, like it almost doesn't matter what they look like defensively because they're such a nightmare on offense.
And do you think that Edwards has just a higher ceiling defensively than what we saw from him in college, just given the physical tools?
No doubt about that. And the NBA is a long grind of a season. It usually takes players multiple years to get there. But I mean, we're also talking about a guy who's so gifted athletically that even if he's performing at 60 to 70% of his defensive capabilities, that's going to be above average for where somebody who's less athletic and talented might provide, even if they're, trying their hardest.
Number 2, the Golden State Warriors. And so I promise this will not be the question both to you and our listeners for every team, but this is a pick that you probably see them keeping, right? Because I think I don't even think it's a theory. It was just this pipe dream that they could use this and then the Timberwolves pick and then Wiggins' salary fodder to go in there and get Giannis. Like that's just, even if the Bucks flame out in the playoffs this year, which I don't expect them to, it's just not happening. Like we've already talked about it. And even if, let's say Giannis does want to leave Milwaukee, I think he's in a position where his is the first supermax that figures to age really well. And so just sign it. And if you want to leave, figure out a way to force a trade later. And so knowing that, my guess would be that they end up keeping the pick. And maybe that's just like a lack of me being able to foresee like players available that'd be worth moving this pick for. I don't know you know, people have cited that maybe some weird things are going on between Oladipo and Indiana, and I just don't know if, this pick and the Timberwolves pick plus Wiggins, and then you need other filler for Victor Oladipo and a Miles Turner. Like, I don't even know if that's a starting point for Indiana. I don't know whether that's too much to give up from Golden State with Oladipo heading towards free agency, but that almost feels like the ceiling on a deal. You could also look at Bradley Beal, and I know there's the sentiment of just go out and get a superstar, you'll figure out the rest later. But even if you could, if you trade Wiggins in this pick for Bradley Beal, like, your defense is just not that Wiggins is a good defender, but to have Beal now after the defense he played this year, I know he's a better defender than that, and perhaps on a better team he tries harder. I just don't know if that ends up working out for the Warriors. Going after Drew Holiday or an Aaron Gordon, those aren't players that I would give up the number one pick for. I love Drew Holiday, but he's also headed towards free agency in 2021 if he declines his player option. And so I'm wondering if you share those sentiments with me, where you first off expect them to keep this pick.
I'm really torn on what they should do with the pick. A large part of me knows and understands that trying to lean into winning now and extending the title window as it's open with Clay and with Steph and Draymond there is the right thing to do. But we speak about trading out of pick spots as if it's such an easy thing to do, especially when you have large salaries like Andrew Wiggins potentially involved. It's really difficult to construct the trade that's going to work well for that. And part of the issue is you have to find somebody who wants to trade up into where Golden State is. And right now, this is a draft with, the media narrative is driving really three guys atop this draft: Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, and James Wiseman of Memphis. And, Golden State has one of the top three picks for conceivably land one of those three guys. But you have to find the right trade partner who's not only infatuated enough to trade into getting one of those three and leapfrogging the competition, but has the right win now asset for Golden State. So for me, it's less about should they do it as much as it is there anyone out there that makes sense for them to work with that would allow them to do it sensibly?
And I think there might be teams. There's always going to be teams that would be willing to take the number two pick off someone's hands. But if Aaron Gordon or Drew Holiday is the ceiling on your return, is that something you really consider using with this pick? I don't think that I would.
Yeah, it's tough to justify, especially it's going to depend on how the Warriors value really the top two guys on their board when it comes down to it. I mean, whether that's Edwards, Ball, Wiseman, whoever it is. I think Wiseman would be a great fit long term there, but I also think he's got a lot to figure out in the interim with shot selection and stretching his range reliably to the 3-point line. He probably keeps their window open the longest and might be the one guy who can carry, Steph and Clay as their careers wind down. But immediate impact wise, I don't know if he helps them get closer to a title next year. And that's the catch-22 of all this. They have to figure out a way to balance both.
Would Wiseman be your pick? I know he's number 2 on your big board, but what would Wiseman be your pick with the Warriors on the clock if you're them? Or do you look at the one that I became infatuated with after reading you and other people was, and I don't know if this is too high for him, but Devin Vassell from Florida State.
I think I'd lean towards Wiseman there. But so for those of you listening at home, James Wiseman, number 2 on my board. Devin Vassell is number 3. And one of the reasons I love him, he's the best team defender that I've ever seen in the college game. Now, he's a really strong 3-and-D prospect. He doesn't have that elite upside to carry a team on offense, but he is an elite 3-and-D prospect. And those guys, they don't grow on trees, and they fit perfectly within what Golden State is doing. So I don't know if you can justify taking him with the number 2 pick over guys who have such high upside, especially if there's a possibility Anthony Edwards is available at 2. But right. With all that said, I love the fit of Devin Vassell there.
The number 3 pick belongs to the Charlotte Hornets. I would say they are locks to keep this pick. Is there, so one, who do you have? You already mentioned you had Vassell was 3rd on your big board. So would you pick him? If we're assuming Edwards and Wiseman go 1-2, if you're the Hornets, are you taking Vassell that high, or do you have to look at some of the other players that are available at this point still, where maybe this is a good point to get into your thoughts on LaMella Ball, who you seem to be much lower on than than the consensus. Because if you look at mock drafts right now, immediately after the lottery, they have Edwards going to Minnesota, Wiseman going to Golden State, and then LaMelo Ball going to Charlotte.
And I think that's probably how it ends up, just based on consensus. And there's an opportunity, and the way I view the draft is essentially you swing for the fences more when you have one of those top picks because you need to land a franchise game changer. And LaMelo Ball, there's no doubt he has the potential to be that, but I'm not sold on the shooting or the defensive impact. I think those are two areas where he really falls behind in a lot of ways. Charlotte's probably the right franchise to take that risk and go after either of those, any of those three guys, Edwards, Wiseman, or Ball, who would fall to them at the third pick. They probably have to take whoever it is there because their franchise changing upside is so high. The other name that I'd consider here is Obi Toppin from Dayton, and a lot of this comes more so just from knowing Michael Jordan's tendencies a little bit. He'll never tank. He wants to field the most competitive team immediately. Toppin, one of the national players of the year in the college game this season, has that inside, outside, front court scoring ability and is a freak athlete in transition. So I would not be shocked if Toppin found his way into the top three here as a result of that. But it's going to be hard to pass up on Edwards, Wiseman, or Ball, whoever's available for Charlotte.
Now, what you have LaMelo Ball's number 12 on your big board, which I would say is decidedly lower than I've seen him anywhere else. And so what are your concerns with him?
Yeah, so think about what goes into being successful in the modern NBA game. If you're going to play with the ball in your hands predominantly, you need to be able to score off the bounce and create shots for yourself. You need to be able to shoot from three off the dribble so that teams can't go under pick and rolls against you and just completely handcuff the way that you're defended. Because if a defense can go underneath a ball screen, what it essentially takes away is that ball handler's ability from getting into the lane, because the defender's not concerned about coming out and guarding them on the perimeter. They're going to stay lane protected the entire time. And if you're a fantastic passer, you rely wholly on the defense coming out and guarding you so that you can get into the lane, draw help defenders, and then kick to open teammates. So as amazing of a passer LaMelo Ball has the potential to be, it's somewhat limited and handcuffed by the fact that he doesn't shoot it and score it from the perimeter effectively enough to really draw defenses out to him. Maybe it's just my coaching background and how much of a stickler I am on some of the details on the defensive side, but he's one of the worst and least consistent defenders on a daily basis, possession by possession basis that I've seen. And those things really detract me from him. Again, that if the shot does work and if he does end up being somebody who reliably and efficiently creates his own shot, then we've got an all-star caliber player on our hands. But I'm not a huge fan of what I've seen so far enough to get me to buy in that that's going to happen.
But you think that that's still a possibility as his ceiling, given his offensive tools overall?
Yeah, it is. And the way I view prospects here is you have to look at their floor, their ceiling, and the kind of middle outcome that would happen as a result of that, and then weigh them each based on the probability that the player hits that ceiling. So for LaMelo, his ceiling is on par with anybody else in this draft as being one of the top ones there. I just think there's a lower percent chance that he hits that ceiling as opposed to a guy like Anthony Edwards or James Wiseman. Now, that said, I also think that, kind of the most likely outcome for LaMelo is lower than the most likely outcome for 11 other guys in this draft. Even though LaMelo's ceiling is higher, there's just such a wide variance between where he's going to, projectably kind of be with his skill level.
So if we still expect him, if he were to go to 3 at Hornets, the Bulls are then on the clock at 4. Do you see anyone from, whether it's your gut feeling with who they would take or who, just looking at your big board, which I like, diverges so much from the consensus, at least to me, from what I see, who would you have them take in this situation? Assuming the 3 players you just discussed, obviously, are already off the
Yeah, and I think you have to. I think that clear top 3 is probably in some order going to go 1, 2, 3. I really like Deni Avdija from Maccabi Tel Aviv. Of a 6'9", 6'10", swing forward, and every time I watch him, I can't help but think of Tony Kukoc. Just seeing that type of player in a Bulls uniform again. Maybe I'm biased from that, but there's something about his mismatch inside outside ability that he's not going to be your 20 point, 25 point per game scorer, but he can go out there and get you 16, 7 and 5. And with the Chicago Bulls team the way that it's constructed right now, with Zach LaVine being their scoring punch in the backcourt, and they really need a little bit more versatility on the wings at that 3/4 spot. I think Oppie is really an awesome pick for Chicago.
I'm actually surprised that so many, and again, there's the element of if you want to take the best player available and someone else, if it's a Killian Hayes and you believe that that's the best player available, I get it. But I'm surprised at how many mock drafts have them taking like some variation of a guard or a big or just not a wing, which it seems like they need the most.
Yeah, and I'm not a guy who tries to draft at least in the lottery based on fit. I think it's predominantly going to be best player available, just because the guys who are that good come along so rarely and are difficult to procure. Names that are commonly going to be thrown out in this next tier of guys. You mentioned my draft board really varies from consensus quite a bit, and I'm not shy about ranking guys that I really like much higher than consensus would have them, or guys that I don't like much lower. And two guys who I'm just not really high on right now, Tyrese Halliburton and Isaac Okoro. Both of them get mentioned as potential top 10 or even top 5 picks. Halliburton more so as a playmaking, really high IQ, decent catch and shoot threat that people see as this versatile, really unique playmaker out of that 2 spot in the backcourt. And then Isaac Okoro, just this fierce, ferocious, athletic, defensive-minded wing who might be the best athlete in this draft. So, those two guys come up really frequently in the lottery, and I wouldn't be shocked if consensus is right. If the Bulls are targeting those two names in that range, I think they make sense as fits in Chicago. But if we're talking best player available, I don't have either of them in my top 20, which is pretty sharp deviation from the consensus.
Let's get into that. You have Halliburton at 22 on your big board and Okoro at 23. So what do you see in them that has you putting them just so low based on, I guess pure talent or pure ceiling, however you're basing this off of?
I guess we'll start with Halliburton because there's a natural segue. A lot of the complaints that I have about him being ranked as this top 10 guy really center on the same things as my LaMella Ball questions do. First with Halliburton, he is not going to be a one-on-one scorer. His free throw rate and his ability to draw contact and get to the line is probably the lowest in this draft class for any guard or predominant ball handler out there. He's not someone who creates his own shot, and he's not someone who draws contact enough to kind of get to the free throw line. So he's not, to me, somebody that I project being the type of player who has the ball in his hands, which again, kind of handcuffs the great passing ability that a guy like him possesses. The other part of it that's so strange to me, he's an effective catch and shoot 3-point threat, but he has this weird slow release on his shot. And normally I'm not the guy who goes out there and tries to, critique or say that, the form on somebody's shot is really important, because if it goes in, it goes in. That's what matters. But Halliburton's release is very slow, and he gets almost bow-legged and brings his feet together when he rises. So in the NBA, when there's a lot more length on the perimeter and guys guarding him who can, from an athletic standpoint, go from help defense to guarding him on the perimeter, he's going to have less time to rise for shots. And what that means is he's really slow with his first step to create separation and get in the lane. So as a playmaker and a great passer, not great at creating his own shot, which is going to change the way he's defended off the bounce, and not great and quick enough at attacking poor closeouts to get in the lane and make those high IQ decisions in there. So I'm not sure where his playmaking and passing ability really comes from at the next level. Beyond that, he's a really poor defender at the point of attack, just dies on screens, not really the quickest laterally, still has to work on his frame a lot. But again, a pretty solid, sixth man, unique role player type of guy, but not someone that I see, reliably playing an offense through. And if you're a backcourt guy who's not going to be an elite catch and shoot threat, I don't think that I'd spend a lottery pick on somebody who's not going to either give the keys to or just knock down every shot he gets.
The another guy, before I ask you about the number 5 Cavaliers that you seem to be lower on than the consensus is,
Yep.
I've seen him go mostly in the top 7 throughout the mocks. Is Onyeka Okongwu? What is it? What is it about him that you just don't see as a, you have him on your big board, I think, well outside the top 10. Yeah, he's number 13, and I think he's been probably consensus just on mock drafts around top 7.
Yeah, so Okongwu is the second rated post on my kind of big board here. And the reason that he falls towards the tail end of the lottery in my mind speaks more to the positional overload of bigs right now, that they're almost dime a dozen. You can get a lot of big guys who make an immediate or kind of a replacement level impact without having to spend a lottery pick on them. So it has less to do with Okongwu not being a very good prospect as it does him just being at the wrong position. Now, he's more of a jack of all trades, master of none. Like, he's a strong, solid defender. He has some pick and pop upside. He's a consistent finisher around the basket. And that well-rounded nature makes him a very safe type of pick. But again, in the lottery, I think a lot of these teams are hoping to swing for somebody who's going to be on the floor for their franchise in crunch time. And I don't know if Okongwu is quite switchable enough or dominant enough as a stretch 5 to really be the type of post player that's just outside the mold that I would say, yeah, if we draft him, we're getting a guy who we know is going to be on the floor in crunch time that no other big that we can really find is going to give us.
So you're Cleveland, and you're on the board at number 5. Who are you taking?
Geez, if Avia's off the board, I think Devin Vassell.
I feel like they need him probably even more so than Chicago does. Their wing situation is not pretty.
Yeah, they do. And if they don't, then I think Devin Vassell is the pick there. They have 2 guys in their backcourt who are going to, conceivably carry this team into the future, both be pick and roll types of creators. And they have, that dilemma of what do they do with Drummond and Tristan Thompson all coming up. But the safest way to kind of navigate through all of this is find somebody that fits with every single piece and still has a ton of upside left to grow. I think Vassell is that guy just because of his dominant level of defense. I think Avia would be that guy if available there because he just brings something really unique to the table. And then one other name that I'll kind of throw out there and mentioned a little bit earlier is Obi Toppin. I think Kevin Love, even though he's inked this decently long deal with Cleveland, there's only so much more that they can squeeze out of that lemon. The juice is drying up out of Kevin Love a little bit. And, Obi Toppin, if they're comfortable with kind of the offensive upside that he brings there, I wouldn't be shocked if again, he finds his way up to the 5th pick.
The Hawks are at number 6. Yeah. They're in an interesting spot. I think most mocks have them taking a big, but based off what you said about Okoro before, I could almost see them taking him in this spot.
He makes a lot of sense here just based on what they're looking for and what they need. But again, if we're talking best player available, the only box that player needs to check is he's going to be able to play alongside Trae Young. And that's it. And that's where maybe 2 of my other top 6 or 7 guys on the big board, Kyra Lewis from Alabama and Killian Hayes from Germany, I don't know if those 2 guys are great fits along Trae Young, but if I had to go with one, I'd definitely go with Killian Hayes just because of his size. He's 6'5", 6'8" wingspan. The shooting is the question mark with him. And the last thing you want to do is take away gravity and spacing from Trae Young, from really allowing him to lean into the greatness of the offensive production that he can have. So, there's a lot of different players in that wing spot that are available. And we're talking about trade up partners. Like, if there's a way that they can end up getting Wiseman, I'd love to see him there. I think he'd be an unbelievable fit. But
after they traded for Clint Capella and Dwayne Dedmon?
Yeah, even afterwards. Again, it's more so just the top type of player available. Like, you are forced to kind of build around them when you get the opportunity to add them. So I think there's a lot of different ways they can go with this pick. Again, I'm not huge on Okoro, but the fit there would make sense. Avia would be awesome if he ended up there. and then guys like Vassell or Killian Hayes are definitely workable.
Now, I'm seeing that you're also Kyra Lewis is 4th on your big board, and I've yet to see him in a mock draft taken higher than 18. So tell me about. I now all of a sudden need to know more about Kyra Lewis.
Yeah, I'm. I don't want to say irrationally high because that makes it seem like I'm. It's an indefensible position, but I absolutely love Kyra Lewis. He is so fast. He's one of the fastest players. He reminds me a lot of De'Aaron Fox in a lot of ways, and especially the De'Aaron Fox that we see now, who has that 3-point shooting range. When I'm evaluating point guards, the first box that I'm checking is kind of that shooting ability. Are they able to knock down 3-pointers off the bounce and force people to come out and guard them? And with Lewis, the answer is absolutely yes. He's a really strong 3-point shooter off the bounce. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he was well above 35% and off the dribble threes from the pick and roll. And what that does is that unlocks the rest of the lane for him to really get into and create for others. So with his speed, his quickness, his ability to play at his own pace in transition, I have a really hard time thinking that he doesn't fit alongside a lot of the great scorers in this league. He can play on ball. He's a solid catch and shoot threat. Great pick and roll player. Needs to add more strength. Not the most consistent defensively, but really well rounded on offense in a way that every time I watch him play and go back and dive into the film, I see some kind of superstar potential there.
Now, why do you think why are you so high on him, or compared to, or why are most mocks having him so far outside the lottery? I'll put it. Is it because he doesn't project? It's hard to project him defensively. It doesn't look like he's only has a 6'5" wingspan, which is not long at all. And so I'm just curious, that might be the actual biggest discrepancy in terms of players you're higher on than the consensus. And so I'm wondering what the majority of people might be focusing on that either you're overlooking or don't think is going to be that as big of a problem.
Sure. I think a lot of it probably centers on the defensive impact. He's not necessarily switchable. He's a little bit thin based on the speed that he plays at. He just hasn't added a ton of muscle yet. He's not a great vertical athlete. And a lot of times, we look for guys who have those highlight plays or that ability to really finish in traffic in an eye-popping way. I don't think Lewis is a poor finisher, but at the same token, he doesn't pop off the screen at you as somebody who's going to be elite at the next level. So there's probably some question marks that go into how consistently he'll finish amongst greater athletes and larger defenders. But probably the biggest thing comes around to his mid-range scoring. He's not a great pull-up shooter in the mid-range. He relies on floaters a little bit more than true pull-up jumpers. And when you're evaluating lead guards, a lot of times hitting that pull-up shot in the mid-range, for everybody who's watched the Celtics Sixers series right now, Kemba Walker making those pull-up jumpers time after time after time has really changed the complexion of Boston's offense, because mid-range Jays are what NBA defenses really give you. So the knock on Lewis is that he hasn't proven consistent at hitting them from the mid-range, and that he almost plays too fast for himself to enable that shot to really occur and get his feet underneath him. Those are teachable things to me, and those are things with repetition I think he'll be able to handle. And the value in a guy like him is he can play off ball. He's a strong catch and shoot type of threat. So I don't see him as being somebody that is going to flounder when he gets in the league just because he hasn't nailed that shot down yet.
The Pistons at number 7, it's, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here on this one, it seems like, I know for a fact a lot of these teams, and it's the biggest or the hottest commodity in the NBA right now, want wings, and it seems like this is a fairly wing-depleted draft. So which direction, could you see the Pistons going at number 7, relative, again, to who you think might be available?
I think the Pistons, more than anything positionally, they just need somebody who's going to go out there and create a shot for himself and go get a bucket on the perimeter. That's something that they lack, and to be honest, they haven't really had in a long time. I know Reggie Jackson had 20 games of it when he first got traded there before his entire body blew up. But Killian Hayes just makes perfect sense for Detroit, and it's one of those names when you're going through these mock drafts, sometimes you see a perfect fit and you think of ways in your head how to make it work so that player doesn't get selected before they're on the clock. I think Detroit kind of gets lucky with the types of teams that are leapfrogging over them, that they're not going to be reaching too high for point guards. Hayes actually makes appearances on a few experts' draft boards as number 1 because he's just got that self-creation to his game. His shooting is coming along. His 3-point stroke is improving, but
I looked at his 3-point splits before we were doing this for I think it's 2 or 3 years he spent overseas, like where he was playing, and they're just absolutely like wild.
Yeah, he's all over the place a little bit with his shot, and again, it's improving. I think it's gaining consistency to the point where it's not a huge worry of mine. But out of the guards in this class, outside of LaMelo and Anthony, he gives you the best combination of self-creation and scoring ability with really high IQ passing. Like this guy, I think he's a little bit underrated with how great of a passer he is, and has a lot of polish to his game for an 18-year-old.
Number 8 is the Knicks, and so I almost gut feel like they're not going to have this pick and that it's just going to end up in Oklahoma City. That's my gut feeling. But based on stuff I was reading from you over the past 2 days, the 3 players I zeroed in on for them, and I'm not sure that they would have the guts to pick them, was Kyra Lewis stood out to me based off what you wrote about him. And then also Devin Vassell, who I now know how to pronounce his name apparently, and then Saddiq Bey, who you talked me into like months ago as a clear top 10 prospect. And so do you think they would have the guts to pick those guys in spots that seem like they might be a little bit higher than normal, or would you see them going a different direction here at number 8?
Damn, we're talking New York City, baby. We got the lights, we got the glam in the garden. We got to swing for the fences here. Like, they have to take a guy who's going to be seen as a load lifter on offense. And I love Vassell. I love Saddiq Bey, but they're more role players at their best, and they need to be around really good players in order to reach their potential. I don't know if the Knicks have the infrastructure.
They do not. We can move on.
To make that happen. So for me, like, I think Obi Toppin, if he falls to them, all the way down there to pick number 8, would be an unbelievable get for the New York Knicks because of that inside-outside offensive ability. They've thrown $50 million a year and 8 different players to play the 4 and the 5 spots for them, and none of them have really worked. I think Toppin probably stabilizes their front court rotation, and the pick and pop ability is real. And that's the type of partner that they need to put next to R.J. Barrett and even Mitchell Robinson, if either of those guys are long-term going to be part of the core. Right. I'd love to see, if Killian Hayes is still available at 8. He's a pick definitely worth considering. And Kyra Lewis, again, I'm much higher on him than most. I don't expect him to be a name that's thrown around in this category. But again, if the Knicks talk themselves into falling in love with him, I think that he's the type of guy that just brings so much buzz and excitement to the Garden that kind of hard to pass up on him as well.
If they're looking at it through the lens of, and I know this isn't necessarily the way they draft, but that they want to keep Mitchell Robinson and R.J. Barrett, who, as of right now, you would just call 2 non-shooters. Is it better to go with does Obi Toppin he shot 43 of 103 on 3-pointers during his 2 years at Dayton, so 41.7%. But again, that's not a ton of volume. Is he the better pick, or can Killian Hayes play alongside both those guys a little bit better?
The Hayes and Barrett fit is a little bit tricky. I think it's really going to depend on the rest of the positions that they would fill out. Like Hayes, Barrett, and Mitchell Robinson's not a great spacing unit. You need 2 kind of elite shooters to fill out the 3 and the 4 next to those guys. So I think Toppin's probably the better fit long term. But he's also, playing with Mitchell Robinson masks Toppin's biggest deficiency, which is just his overall closeouts and defensive ability. Like, for someone who's a freak athlete, he does not move well laterally. And having Mitchell Robinson stand behind you and just sweep up everything at the rim really would be best case scenario for Toppin. So if I'm the Knicks and he's available at 8, I'd go with him.
Also, his hometown is Ossining, New York, or
whatever it's pronounced. New York,
so, bring him home, apparently. Number 9 we are up to is the Washington Wizards. They're a bizarre team here. But I forgot to ask you with the Knicks. Do you think that they're actually making or keeping this pick?
I think they're keeping this pick. All indications to me seem like they know at this point that they have to build long-term and for the future. They just hired Johnny Bryant, who's a great player development coach, and they're leaning into making those types of hires right now. To me, that signals a team that's willing to, go a little bit younger and invest in the future.
And that's why I feel like by draft day, whenever it actually happens, since it looks like it'll be pushed back, I'll walk off my sentiment of feeling that they're going to get rid of this pick. I think I'm just over emotional after they had another failed lottery. They just haven't moved up in the lottery since the rigged one, since 1985, basically, or supposedly rigged one. I don't actually think it was rigged. So I feel like I'll move off that because that was the hire, the Johnny Bryant hire. That's the one that made me think like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be like another typical Knicks thing. And I think we need to see them go through free agency first to kind of prove that. They could either have cap space or maybe they won't, depending on what they do with all those non-guarantees and Bobby Portis's team option. And then there's always the trade market. So it's more of like I need to see it to believe it. But that was the hire that made me think, oh, maybe they're really going to invest in player development under Leon Rose.
Yeah, I think they will, and Leon Rose, actually a Dickinson alum, school that I coach at right now. So, wish him nothing but the best through this journey. And they're in a spot right now as a more rebuilding type of franchise that I don't think there's a wrong pick that they can make, so long as they can justify the fact that it's going to be a player who continues to get better over the next 4 years. Like that's all that they need. They need talented dudes in the building who continue to improve.
Washington at number 9. Anyone stand out for you there? And I think it's probably, again, you're not drafting based on this anyway, but I think it's probably safe to operate under the assumption that unless they get absolutely blown away by an offer for Beal, and the only two teams that I think can make one now are really Golden State and Minnesota. I guess the Pelicans still, if they really wanted to. But if we're operating under the assumption that Beal is going to be there in Washington to see how it goes with John Wall's return, what kind of direction do you see them going in here?
With the sake, I don't want to just throw out the same names as we've been talking over and over and say, well, if this guy's still here, like a lot of the names that we've mentioned, if they end up falling down to number 9 are great picks. I think Onyeka Okongwu actually makes sense here in Washington, another great fit, as well as one of the best players available on the board. They need a little bit of rim protection. As we've seen this year, their defense is amongst the worst things I've ever watched in my life. And that's that's generous, Dan. I think Okongwu gives them a little bit of stabilization on the inside. They need somebody who long-term can be a pick-and-pop type of threat, but immediately can come in and just play a few minutes right away. I think this is a team that has immediate playoff aspirations. And with that in mind, I have a tough time envisioning them being the type of team that's going to just take a long-term project or somebody that they don't see making any type of impact right away. So, a couple names all thrown out there that haven't been brought up thus far. Jalen Smith from Maryland. I've been high on him throughout this whole process, and even since the preseason, had him as a top 10 guy on my draft board. Recently, I know Jonathan Wasserman today came out and was basically saying that Smith's name is really rising on a bunch of draft boards and intel that he's hearing from other folks. Wouldn't be shocked to see him go there because he has all of the makings of a modern big once his body kind of fills out. The other name is Aleksej Pokusevski, 7 foot, like really unique unicorn type of player. He is the ultimate swing for the fences guy. And once you kind of clear the top 7 or 8, and a lot of those names who consensus sees it as being like really good, high level A and B tier guys, there's no reason not to swing for the fences on Pokusevski. So any team really that doesn't like the crop of players available to make an immediate impact, go ahead and swing for Poku.
The Suns are at number 10, and so they still, even after what happened in the bubble, you clearly need, even if you're going to keep Dario Saric and bring him off the bench, which certainly helped with their shot creation, it feels like they need another one. But it also feels like for the point that they're at, that I could see them going for maybe someone they view as like more of an immediate impact wing. And so I'm wondering, are there any shot creators that would fit well that you could see maybe falling this far that you've already mentioned, or might this be one of those good landing spots for the Vassells or the Sadiq Bey?
This would be an awesome landing spot for Kyra Lewis, to be honest. And, being number 4 on my board, I put him there based on where I think his career will look back on him kindly, not as where I expect him to be drafted. And I think 10 is probably a reasonable ceiling for where he'll end up going on draft night. I think he'd be the perfect fit in Phoenix. They need somebody who's not going to be a defensive liability at the 1. They need maybe one more guy who can create his own shot as well as get easy ones for Booker. And, I wouldn't mind if they added another wing there just to be able to move Booker to almost the full-time one in those late game scenarios when Rubio has to sit on the bench. So, you hit the nail on the head with a guy like Vassell. I think, I think Lewis would be awesome there, but I don't know how much I love, one of the more defensive liability guys on the perimeter, maybe like a Tyrese Halliburton. Even if he's available there, I don't think defensively he and Booker make a great backcourt combo.
Two players I want to ask you about before we get to the final four picks of the lottery that I feel like they've, in the big boards that I've read and then the mock drafts, obviously they seem to be all over the place. The first one would be Cole Anthony, just did not have a good season at North Carolina. And so what are your impressions of him? Do you think that he's going to fall outside the lottery ultimately?
Yeah, I think he probably does slide a little bit. He's a really polarizing prospect, Dan. So where I land on him is almost more in the middle of where most people do, which is atypical for how I view prospect evaluations. Like I'm usually either really, really high above normal or really low. But for Anthony, like he is a score first guard and is great with step backs, creating his own shot, but needs the ball in his hands. And at North Carolina, the spacing around him completely fell apart, and their team was abysmal. They just weren't the right mesh of players to support him and what he does best. Now, any NBA team that drafts him, that's where the catch-22 comes in, because is he good enough to mandate that role in the NBA? I don't know if the answer is clearly yes. Coming into the season, a lot of people thought that, but then when you see the struggles that he underwent at North Carolina, it gives good reason for pause. For me, I think Anthony has a great role being like almost a backup point guard who plays off the bench and then might come in for the final 6 or 8 minutes of the game. Plays 24 to 28 minutes a night, averages 13, 14 points and a few assists, and is just allowed to be him. Like he needs to go to a situation that allows him to be him. And it depends on whether, if a team who's on the clock sees him as the best type of player available and has those, the tools available to let him be him, or if there's someone else that's just a little more tantalizing on the board. So he'll be hurt a little bit if there are a lot of guys that slide a little bit in this draft.
Is there a team that you think would be just a good, if he's going to optimize his NBA potential, that would just be a good fit? I don't care if they could be at the end of the first round for all I care, but is there a team that you think he would just be the perfect project for?
I think Orlando would be smart to take a risk on somebody like him. I think they need a little bit of offensive punch. I think he can play with Markelle Fultz. And, at the end of the day, like a Steve Clifford team is going to be incredibly competitive, and he's someone who gets the most out of his guys. I think that would be a pretty strong situation for him to roll into.
This next guy, so RJ Hampton, I feel like I heard so much buzz about him leading into the season. And again, he was in New Zealand, obviously, and just like beforehand though, but it feels like the hype has almost subsided. You do have him at 11th on your big board. We haven't mentioned him yet, but it's like he's still right there in the top 10. Is there, like, what happened here? Why did the hype subside? Was he just always overhyped? And then the same question I would throw to you that I did about Cole Anthony. Is there a team that ideally that could optimize him and what he could do that you would prefer to see him fall to? Again, just looking at it as where could he have the best beginning to his career or his career overall?
Sure. So RJ Hampton, came out of high school as a prolific scorer and just an unbelievable athlete. About 6'5" with a 6'7" or 6'8" wingspan, really, really solid defender. But when he got to New Zealand, very polar opposite of the type of season that LaMelo Ball had. And I wrote an article on this, kind of comparing the two after going through and watching a ton of NBL games this year. RJ Hampton played on a really competitive playoff and championship-driven team with the New Zealand Breakers. And part of his role there, playing with former NBA guys and a bunch of talent, was to assimilate a little bit and not be a lead guard, play more of like a 3-and-D wing. Now, his three-point shot's not great. So when you put somebody in a 3-and-D role and they're not a great three-point shooter, all you see is the D. And, he doesn't impress or pop off the page for a lot of those reasons. Now, LaMelo was the exact opposite. He was given the keys to a horrible team in the league and just asked to kind of be their savior, and they allowed him to do anything and everything he wanted. So, of course, LaMelo's numbers and the production and all those things are going to look a lot better than somebody like Hampton. I'm high on Hampton because I believe that his work ethic is strong. I've heard a lot of great intel about how he's worked on his jumper and really been dedicated to the process this summer. And a lot of times those guys whose names kind of disappear and you don't see a lot about them, like they're quietly the ones that are putting in the work to beat everybody who are soaking up the spotlight. Two places I'd love to see him are both in his home state of Texas. One is with the Dallas Mavericks. I think he'd be an unbelievable fit next to Luka Doncic because he can take those prime defensive assignments, can also create his own shot. And if that 3-point jumper really does come along, he's going to be a steal for them in the early 20s. The other name is San Antonio. And the huge reason for that, nobody makes consistent shooters more than the San Antonio Spurs. So if they can fix his jump shot, they're going to have a litany of those like Swiss Army knife, 6'5", long-armed guards and wings to really work with. That would make them a fascinating team.
That's funny that you say that, because for so long it's felt like they've lacked that exact type of player, and now all of a sudden they have it. I won't say it in droves because we don't know what Lonnie Walker is going to be. Ditto for Keldon Johnson. But if you add, if you're them, would you consider taking Hampton at number 11? And so if you add him to the mix, it's like now they do have now all of a sudden they have these guys. And even DeJounte Murray's he's sized more like a wing than he actually is a point guard.
Right. And that's almost the wave of the future now, Dennis. If you can get like 3 or 4 guys that are 6'5" to 6'7" with long wingspans, all of them are capable of doing things off the bounce. Like you can play so many different styles of play as a result. 11, it's always going to depend on what happens above them. Like guys like Devin Vassell or, even Onyeka Okongwu, just those really solid all-around guys typically seem to be appealing to the Spurs and their brass. I don't see them being the type of front office that likes to take these really, really high-risk type of players. Another name we haven't mentioned, an international guard, Theo Maladon from France. I really like him and his shot-making ability. So, he's another name I think gets mentioned more in like the 20s than anything else. But we know the Spurs. They march to their own beat. They don't care much about what the consensus is. If they see a player that they really like, they're going to take him. And they don't think twice, and they're not usually wrong. So I'm not going to pretend to be the expert that could tell them what to do. I'm just going to wait until draft night and see whoever they pick 11th and say, great pick.
All right, so let's say Okongwu and RJ Hampton are both on the board at 11. Which one are they taking?
Oh, that's a tough one. If it's me, it's Hampton. If it's them, it's probably Okongwu.
I feel like that sounds about right based off what you said about the two of them. The Kings at number 12, I'm not really sure what they target in this draft because they have like a lot of everything kind of, but like none of it's good enough except for De'Aaron Fox. And then we don't know enough about Marvin Bagley, obviously. Where would you, based on players that you think could kind of fall to this range, what names are you looking at or what needs are you looking to fill here?
I think two things stand out to me. One is the need for another kind of power wing. Like you look at the way that their roster is kind of shaped right now, and you see Harrison Barnes is reaching his peak and starting the downward trend of his career. You look at the Buddy Hield, Bogdan Bogdanovic situation and wonder if both are going to be able to stick around long term. I think they need another solution at that 2 or 3 spot. So Vassell, Saddiq Bey, Isaac Okoro are all different types of names that positionally I think that they'd love to have. And then the out of left field one here, if they're willing to be patient and not try to add a player that they think is going to instantly make them leapfrog the litany of teams that are in the Western Conference right now, then I think Pokusevski would be really intriguing there because long term, you add him and Marvin Bagley, like that is just the weirdest, most creative and cool front court that I could ever think of. We'll see if that, we don't really know who the decision maker long term is going to be in Sacramento and how risky Joe Dumars, if he's making the draft pick, is going to be enabled to be. So I don't see them being that swing for the fences team. Like they're going to have to play it conservatively if they don't have their full-time decision maker in play by then. So I think Okoro and Saddiq Bey are kind of guys that would make sense rationally.
How does a Pokusevski Bagley front court end up faring defensively long term though?
It doesn't really matter if you score the way that they can.
It does seem like the wings that you named, power wings that you named, possibly for the Kings, kind of fit into the spot with New Orleans at number 13 as well. It feels like that's the type of player they probably need, unless they want to gravitate towards getting a floor spacing center for those Zion, Brandon Ingram lineups, which I think is the correct way to go. I'm not saying in the draft, it feels like they do need that player, but after you're taking Jackson Hayes, do you burn another lottery pick on a big?
Yeah, and the only really floor spacing, quote unquote center that there might be is Jalen Smith from Maryland, and I think he'd be a solid fit here. But I agree. I think there's probably a little more need for just like defensive minded guys or somebody who's going to be more of a floor spacer. So whether that's Bay, Josh Green from Arizona is a name I really like. I don't know if he's quite, a lottery guy. He's knocking on that door though. And then we've mentioned a bunch of different names throughout that it kind of really makes sense. Even Cole Anthony wouldn't be the worst guy in the world here, just to come in and kind of carry that second unit long term.
And then to round out the lottery, we have the Boston Celtics. This pick is not what everyone expected it to be. That was like one of the primo trade assets for so long, and then the Grizzlies just came out and blew the doors off their expectations this season. If you're Boston, this is a team that I feel like they could do whatever they want. You draft best player available. You could also go for fit. But they also have the number 26th pick, I believe. And so, like, are you trying to move up if you're them, or do you think that there's a good value that they could get at 14?
Yeah, so they have 26 and 30 from Milwaukee this year.
I forgot about the Milwaukee pick.
Yeah, they have 3 first-round picks. And if you take a look at their contract situation with so many young guys on their roster because they've taken a lot of draft picks over the last couple of years, they don't have a lot of room to really take three rookies on their team. And a huge part of that is going to depend upon the development and the belief they have in the current young guys on their roster. So I think it's more likely that you look at the 3 picks that they have and say at least one of them needs to be a draft and stash or an international guy that they don't see coming over right away. So if Pokusevski, Theo Maladon are available, I think they gobble them up. I wouldn't even be surprised if Leandro Bolmaro from Barcelona is a name that gets thrown out there. But the later into the first round you go with picks 26 and 30, the less likely you are of getting that quality draft and stash candidate. So 14th wise, like if one of those big names is available and they may jump on it just to say, okay, we've got the guy of the future who we know is not going to help us right away, but that allows us to really shop around and be more targeted with picks 26 and 30. That may be the strategy that they go. Beyond that, if you're watching this series with Philadelphia, it's pretty apparent that they need a stretch 5. Like they're struggling when they throw the ball to Daniel Tice on the perimeter, and he is just scanning the floor like RoboCop, looking and doing a immediate analytical dive on what's the best place for him to pass it. Like he's not looking at the rim very much. So I think Jalen Smith, and I've been saying this for months, would be such a great fit in Boston because of that pick and pop ability in the middle of the floor. I would love to see him end up there.
This also feels weird to say because they have Hayward, Brown, and Tatum, but it does feel like they could kind of use another wing because like after their top 6 players, let's say, like just going to their bench beyond Marcus Smart, it gets really spotty a little bit quickly. And even if you want to say that Brad Wanamaker gives you enough reserve guard play because you have Marcus Smart, and then you could stagger the minutes of all these other people, it just feels like you lose Gordon Hayward to injury, and then there's really just no clear cut guy to come in and soak up his minutes because Marcus Smart's already playing so much.
Agree. And so with their 3 picks, they kind of have 4 different needs. And I think that one of them is going to end up getting cut out. And that's probably what they feel most comfortable targeting or getting in free agency. So those 4 needs, the international draft and stash guy, they need a pick and pop 5. They need a little more depth on the wings. And they need like a shooting or scoring punch off their bench at the 1 or the 2 spot. Those are 4 different needs that they have. I think they can fill them all. But drafting with a large gap between the 14th pick and the 26th, whatever you decide you're going to do at 14, you're rolling the dice on what else is available at 26 and 30.
To sort of wrap up, what are names outside the lottery that you project to go outside the lottery, even if you're higher on them than the consensus would be and actually would take them inside the lottery? What are names that we should be watching outside of these top 4 teams, maybe as we even get into the 20s?
So a couple guys who I just have this absolute love for. One is Isaiah Joe from Arkansas. I think that his numbers, 3-point shooting wise, look pretty poor on first glance because he was asked to do and undertake the most kind of burdensome three-point shooting season we've ever seen in a Power 5 conference. He took a higher percentage of threes and more threes per game than anyone has in a Power 5 conference before. I think that as soon as his role settles into that catch and shoot thing, he's going to be one of those steals in the draft and a guy that we look at and just say, man, he is so elite at this one thing. How did people let him slip through the radar? A couple other names that I just really like. Precious Achiuwa from Memphis. He's that switchable 1-5 defender and kind of a unique ball of clay. Tyrell Terry from Stanford, a combo guard who really, really shoots it well. I think he's the perfect fit on any team that has their primary scorer or playmaker as like the 3 or the 4 or the 5, any of those front court guys. And then one name who I love as a role player is Killian Tilly from Gonzaga. He's 22. He's had a ton of injury issues in the past, and his age, his durability are things that really kind of will drive down his draft stock. But in the tail end of the first round, as a pure pick and pop 5 man who's a little bit underrated defensively, I think he's going to have a ton of intrigue. And then, Dan, one last name to throw out to you as somebody that kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum I'm not as high on, but is even receiving some lottery interest, is Patrick Williams from Florida State. And he's a pretty strong athlete. He looks exactly the part for what you'd look for as somebody who's your prototypical modern 4. But he is a really inconsistent three-point shooter. And what he does well on offense kind of violates the biggest norm to me of be good at what you're asked to do frequently. You know, he projects as like this strong potential, pull-up shooter in the mid-range. Like, I don't think that's something that you want one of your auxiliary threats to be doing on offense. You want them to space the floor consistency to 3 and into the corners. So a lot of people are high on Williams. For me, I don't see it. I have him as a real late first-round grade on my board. But another name for a lot of casual listeners out there, they probably need to familiarize themselves with because he's going to be getting some late lottery looks.
I will have to take a look at them. Adam Spins, I so much appreciate your insight. Thank you for coming on and taking us through that quasi-lottery mock, and then also your big board, answering all my questions. And I'm sure I'll be DMing you more as we continue to ebb further into draft season. If you guys are not following Adam on Twitter, again, I highly recommend you fix that right friggin' now at Spinella14, at Spinella14. Also, please remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're consuming it. Download every episode. That helps us out a lot. Also, if you're using Apple Podcasts, or even if you're not, please, pretty please subscribe, throw us a rating, and write a review. It could say whatever you want. 5 stars only, though. Even if you're giving us constructive criticism, we will implement it. Rest assured of that. Until next time, though, I leave you all with the shout out to, I think, the player that I'm going to become most fascinated with in this draft, even though Adam doesn't think that he should go to my Knicks, is Devin Vassell. Yep. Shout out to him. And also, Spins, thank you again so much for your time. And as you already know, since I've pestered you now twice in the past 3 weeks, I will definitely be harassing you again in the near future.
Always happy to come on, and we'll be glad to come back next time you have me. So thank you very much, Dan.